What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of MUT Tips. I'm your host, Sean Taylor from the Made Up Theater, and before we jump in, make sure to like the video down below, leave a comment, and as always, subscribe on YouTube down below to be informed of upcoming videos and live streams. Ring that bell. Now let's jump into today's topic, the improv game of Questions Only. Questions Only is a short-form improv game where two people start on the stage and two or more people are off to the side. The two people on stage will get maybe a suggestion. I like to get like a location or a scenario, something a little bit more specific than just like an open-ended suggestion, like an event. And the two people jump into a scene, but they are only allowed to speak in questions. This is an elimination-based game, so if anybody maybe hesitates too long or says a statement as opposed to a question, then they will be rotated out and a new person will come in. When an elimination happens and one person leaves and one person enters, the person entering will initiate the first question. And that person entering can take it in a different direction. You know, they can initiate with a different character, maybe put them in a different time period. So if the suggestion was like plane, for example, the first scene might begin with two people who are like passengers sitting talking back and forth to each other. And if an elimination happens, the person entering might be like a stewardess. And the person on stage can be the same character, but it's a different relationship in a different scene. So I always recommend whoever's entering after that elimination, initiate with a really strong, specific question to let your scene partner know where in time and space we are. Here's a short clip from the game being played on Whose Line Is It Anyway. I'll include the entire clip down below in the description if you want to check that out after this video. But really pay attention to the types of questions as well as just the performance of this game so that we can really lock in on how to play this game successfully and not make it turn into like a boring scene with just questions. Check it out.
Shouldn't we stop for the night?
Huh. You hear that?
What?
What's that noise?
What are you trying to scare me?
Is that Frankenstein's castle in the distance?
You mean that building over there?
You want to go in?
Shouldn't you go first?
Well, I really gotta go first. Don't you watch horror movies?
Don't you think that's a little mean, sending me in there?
Don't you love me?
Before we focus on some tips for this game, let's first focus on some pitfalls that performers might fall into as they're trying to play the game. And these will lead to some tips that we can do to make the game not easier to play, but just more entertaining for not just the audience, but yourselves. The first pitfall, and maybe the more common one, is trying to play the game too safe. I see this a lot where people don't want to make mistakes. They're almost afraid of the elimination that they just play the game way too safe. And their voices tend to be a little bit more robotic, like they're just trying to play the game correctly, rather than injecting personality into the questions that you're delivering. So as you're playing this game, don't be afraid of eliminations. In fact, when you watch the game in Whose Line, there are mistakes and eliminations, and that oftentimes elicits really big reactions from the audience. This type of game has a lot of tension built into it. You know, the audience is watching almost with bated breath to be like, oh my God, who's gonna mess up? Who's gonna mess up? And when that elimination naturally occurs, it elicits a really big like, ah, you know, it comes in the form of a laughter a lot of the times, but it's just a release of tension from the audience as we are trying our best to essentially walk across this tightrope. Another pitfall that goes hand in hand with playing it too safe is deflecting questions back at your scene partner. And an example of this is, you know, if I start a scene and I open like a refrigerator and I'm like, oh, did you drink the last of my milk? You know, I'm saying a very specific question, giving like some answers almost to like what's happening with my question. And, you know, a way to deflect it back would be my scene partner being like, do you think I did? So there's an element of like, I want you to answer that, you know? It's like pushing the question back. Sometimes we like repeat questions that somebody said back at them as a way to play the game safe, but also we're not adding anything, right? With our questions, ideally we want to add information. We are yes-anding in this game. So with our question, if you can add a specific detail or a specific emotion or a specific like nugget of information about what's happening or the relationship between the two people, that is going to be way more impactful. And it's offensive rather than defensive. We want to be bold and offensive in this game rather than, again, playing it too safe and pushing it back on our scene partner. And one more pitfall of this game is lack of variety in the questions. And this kind of goes hand in hand with deflecting back and playing it safe, is we just default to, more commonly, the most common question I see in this game is why, you know? And why can be asked forever. You will never get eliminated if you always start your questions with why. It's like children, you know, they'll oftentimes come to you and go, why? And again, that's pushing it on your scene partner and it's playing it too safe. So vary it up. Try to ask other types of questions like what, or when, or how, or where, you know, there's a lot of different types of questions. You know, like that is ultimately going to push it a little forward, and it allows you to be more specific, which leads us into some tips. Tip number 1 is be specific. You might think back to your first Intro to Improv course, where maybe at some point your teacher said, avoid asking questions or avoid asking too many questions. I do it myself, and the only reason we do that is introductory students are more likely to default to questions that don't answer anything and like set in a tone that's just more, you know, monotonous rather than emotion-filled, right? So like they might be like, oh, who are you? Where are we? What are we doing? Those types of questions that don't answer anything. I'm totally fine with questions. In fact, this is a great game to like practice using questions in a progressive manner where we are answering stuff along the way. So by introducing a little bit more specificity into our questions, we can answer a lot and just make the game more entertaining. So if I started a scene and I just came out and it was like, will you surrender to me? I said it very flat, monotonous. I didn't have a character. I answered something like I'm a high status character asking somebody who maybe is downward, like on their knee to surrender to me. Okay, I've answered maybe a little bit, but I can answer more. I can answer something about my character, about maybe my space or an object that I'm using. I can answer a few things by changing it up a little bit. So I might be, Shink, will you surrender to the French? And now I've just, with my question, I've introduced a voice. I'm a French person. I'm like, you know, I have a sword. I've just injected more personality into my question, and that gives my scene partner so much more to react to, you know? They are given a gift based on my specific choice to be something big, to do something big, and now my question has answered something. Tip number 2 is keep up the pace. This game can become kind of boring and stale if the pace is too slow. We have momentum going forward in this game, and we don't want to slow it down by, again, falling into a pitfall. We're trying to be safe. So there is the improv, like, you know, philosophy of, hey, you know, jump out of the plane and figure out what you're going to do on the way down, you know? And that's a great philosophy for this game. Sometimes I tell people, when somebody says a question to you, just start with the question, you know? Start with like, what, or where, or did, you know, something like that, because it will maybe lead somewhere. So like, for example, if somebody starts on stage and they're just like example I did earlier, did you drink my milk, you know? And I could respond back by being like, so I'm starting with do you want a graham cracker to make up for it? You know, I just kind of admitted that I drank his milk essentially with that question. I'm offering like a peacemaking symbol. So like I just gave a lot of information. All I did was just start with do and saw where it led. It's so impactful to just try. This game is all about trying and failing, starting with like, where, you know, it may not lead anywhere, but that's funny because you tried rather than just like standing on stage, silently looking up in your head and not coming out with anything. Start with the beginning of a question, see where it leads. If you fail, it's gonna make the game more successful. This game is boring if no one gets eliminated. So by trying and failing, it lends itself to the successful parts of this game. And the last tip is be big. When you come on stage in this game, it's best to just commit to like a strong character choice. Physically, with your voice, it'll lead to more context for the types of questions you ask because you already have an understanding of who you are as a character, so you don't have to think of what this character would ask in this situation because you're already thinking as this character. So a few other things that go hand in hand with being big is like, hey, you got maybe a stage that might be big. Use the stage, move, you know? Use your character as a way of walking, like explore the environment. If you're in an office, sometimes it helps to like cross the stage and maybe you find yourself at a copying machine and that leads to like the next question that might happen next. It's all about informing ourselves in this game. Even though it's all based in questions, which questions are based sometimes in ignorance, or like we don't know the answer to something, by, you know, choosing to interact with yourself as a character and with your environment, it will lead you to discover stuff along the way. This game, again, can be stale and boring if we're just asking questions in a blank void. But if we're somewhere and we are someone, the game is easy and it's fun and it's gonna be successful. Before I end the video, let's do a little interactive part, okay? I'm gonna be 5 different characters separated by a blank screen, and during that blank screen, you're going to ask a question back at my character's choice, okay? So like, for example, if I started by saying, will you surrender to the French? It would go to a black screen and you're gonna, yes and what I just said and ask a question as a character of yourself. Would you think a British man would ever surrender to you? So boom, that's a good choice. It gave information. That's what I want from your reaction. Your question response needs to give some answers, okay? So again, it'll be a black screen after each initiation that I give. Commit really strong. Don't judge your choice. Maybe vary it up, different types of questions. And hey, be big. Let's try it out. Did you leave this rose for me in my locker? Oh, do I cut the blue or the red wire? Are you gonna give me your lunch money or what? Did that zombie bite you? I say, is that the fountain of youth? Awesome, how was that? This is a great game to play with your team, with your class, so try it out. It's kind of also redefining how we use questions in improv. If you're still in that mentality of like, oh, questions are bad. They're not. We just need to inject a little bit more into the questions we ask. Again, it's all about answering something within our questions. Enjoy the game of questions only. And that concludes this episode of MUT Tips, everybody. Thank you so much for checking it out. I really appreciate it. Again, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you next time for another episode of MUT Tips. Bye!